was something a little different about me. I felt this way ever since I was a toddler. But maybe when I was about 10 or 11, my parents finally told me what that difference was. And the difference was called Asperger's syndrome. And when my parents first informed me of my diagnosis, I felt elated. I felt like I finally knew what it was about me that separated me from my peers. A lot of parents feel nervous about telling their child their diagnosis, and some parents don't even do it at all. And I say, you give your child a huge favor by telling them. You're not doing them any favors from hiding it from them. Because telling your child the diagnosis informs them of why they feel different, so they don't have to keep wondering, and gives them an idea of how they can improve themselves. Who here has a child, maybe not just on the autism spectrum, but any non-readily apparent disability at all? Let's see those hands.
Who has a family member or a child?
Child. Or family member, either works. Awesome! My parents telling me about this diagnosis made me realize why I had the challenges I had. And I know that in this talk I need to focus on my strengths, but I'll tell you guys about some of the challenges I had and a little bit about how I overcome them. When people think of autism, there are a few immediate things that come to mind. One is sensory tactile. When I was younger, I was extremely bothered both by the texture of my clothes and the texture of my food. Like, I couldn't eat French fries because I just could not stand the texture. I love French fries now, by the way. And wearing scratchy clothes also bothered me to the point where I would rip the tags out of my shirts, which my parents didn't like. Not at all. Because it left holes in my clothes. Another quirky thing was turning my socks inside out so I wouldn't feel the seams. I actually still do that at age 22. And I was able to get around these barriers by being more careful about the clothes that I bought. Not that I care what I look like. I am not a fashion bug in the slightest, as you can probably tell. But shopping at special stores kind of made me feel more comfortable. Another thing that you immediately think of when you think autism is sensory difficulties with visual and auditory and, stimulation. You guys familiar with that? Mm-hmm. Well, I came up with some strategies to get around this. At weddings or bar mitzvahs, there are two main strategies I use. One is called stepping out, which is pretty much what it sounds like. I exit the room for a couple minutes, gather myself, come back in. The other thing I do is I carry a hard mint or caramel or a lifesaver. Orange is my favorite flavor, by the way. And I keep it with me to put in my mouth if I get overstimulated. I mean, it's a bit like a baby pacifier, but hey, it works. The sound sensitivity makes things a little difficult. If I'm in a loud concert, it's all ba-boom, 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 and I feel physical pain from it. To the point where I once had a problem where my friend, who is a singer in a metal band, insisted on me going to one of his concerts. I was able to get out of that by singing I Had a Family Barbecue. to get around that, I again use the two strategies that I mentioned. One that's a little difficult to get around is the smell sensitivity. There have been several instances where I've hyperventilated from being around strong smells. Like, for instance, on a 14-hour flight back home from Israel. That was pretty much a torture chamber. I actually wrote about that one on flightsfromhell.com. Real website, by the way, check it out. I warn people I know ahead of time not to use fragrances around me. And most people respect that. There were a couple of that didn't, but they're jerks. And I suppose the last real autism hallmark that I have, before I get into the lesser known stuff, is the social. I have difficulty reading faces, understanding sarcasm, jumping into conversations, but here are some strategies I use. My friends know how to cue me that I'm interpreting something wrong socially. And they're able to do it discreetly. I actually have a friend at my internship that's pretty good at that. I also have started being able to recognize people by voice better. And if you want to hear something pretty neat, and I'm not the only autistic to be able to do this, I can recognize my coworkers solely by the sounds of their footsteps. So I can be at my desk at my work, which I'll talk about later, and I won't have to turn my eyes away from my computer to figure out who's walking into the room, which is useful because I share an office with 3 other people. But, you know, there is some lesser known autism stuff that you should probably know about. Who here is familiar with fine motor impairment? Well, before I go into the lesser known stuff, there's a disclaimer I have to make that is my disclaimer at every single autism talk I give. And that disclaimer is, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. No two autistics, as we refer to ourselves at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, are the same. And not all of them have the same symptoms, not all of them have the same challenges. I just happened to lose the autism spectrum lottery in having pretty much every difficulty there is. But fine motor impairment, it basically means that my hands don't work the way they should. It gives me trouble with handwriting, and when I was younger, it gave me trouble with buttons and zippers, though I've gotten better at that. But would you like to know how I get around the writing thing? 2 ways. In my college, I'd have note-taker services. How that works is I give the professor my accommodation form, as it's called. Again, other colleges have different procedures for this, so I'm just telling you the procedure for my college, since it's the only college I've been to, even though I'm transferring in the fall. But anyway, note-taker services. The professor asks the class for a volunteer note taker. And it's very rare that somebody does not volunteer. They take my notes for me, photocopy them, put them in my folder at the Disability Center. There was actually one time where my chemistry note taker wrote a love letter in her notebook, photocopied it, gave it to me. That was an awesome one, wasn't it? And one interesting thing about my note takers, remember how I said that not every autistic has the same traits? My note taker for my marriage and family class, which is a requirement of our major, was autistic. And we're still in contact, even after he graduated. The other two lesser known that I'm going to mention: visual processing delay. And how I get around this is pretty interesting. What happens is my eyes, it's not my eyes that are like this, it's my brain. But I process things slower than most people do. And actually, one interesting thing that I personally feel is this combined with my inability to recognize faces gives me a lot of similarities and challenges in common with the blind community. But it's because of the visual processing delay that I receive special driving instruction from Sunnyview Rehabilitation Hospital. And most of my friends are either have or are receiving driving lessons from them as well. At Sunnyview Rehab Hospital, they have special vehicles that allows the instructor to correct us if we make a mistake. The other way visual processing affects me is escalators. I have trouble getting off and on escalators because I just plain can't tell. But I've learned how to look for elevators, which I've gotten better at partially because now, thanks to my internship, I have a lot of friends who are wheelchair users and therefore very proficient in this. I get along well with other people with disabilities, as you could probably tell by now. And I suppose one more lesser known thing I could mention is my inability to recognize euphemisms. Here is one of the earliest examples of that I can remember. Joan, you're going to remember this one. Okay, so I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, I think, and it was